The first time Evan saw the forest, it wasn't there. A barren stretch of field stretched behind his uncle's cabin flat, lifeless, dusted in frost. But at exactly midnight, the wind shifted, carrying the metallic stench of copper and something fouler beneath it, wet, rot, like something long dead left to ferment in the earth. He had been digging absently near the back steps when his fingers struck metal. A compass, rusted but intact. Soon as he touched it, the air thickened, the wind dropped. The night held its breath. The compass's needle spun in endless circles, vibrating like it wanted to escape. Its surface felt unnaturally cold, leaching warmth from his skin, slick like old bone. Then he heard it whispers, faint and behind him, like children muttering secrets in a language he couldn't understand. He turned. The field had vanished. In its place stood the forest trees, too tall, too black, too quiet. Their bark glistened under moonlight like slick skin, some warped with shapes resembling faces, eyes, smiles, screams. Evan stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. The taste burned metallic. He told himself it was shock, that he hadn't seen what he thought he'd seen, but the compass pulsed in his hand, steady as a heartbeat. A vision cracked open behind his eyes. Villagers surrounding the land, chanting in a dialect lost to time, pouring salt and ash in a ring, slicing open goats as offerings. A woman's face pale, mouth sewn shut, flashed before him, then was gone. Whatever they tried to bury, it hadn't worked. The wind died again. The trees creaked forward, just slightly, but enough. The air tasted of old blood now. On the porch, light flickered and steadied. Relief washed over him. Then the light burst, plunging him into blackness, and something in the trees whispered his name. Asterisk, the town of Rainer Hollow was the kind of place that whispered to itself when outsiders passed through. Locals spoke in unfinished sentences and exchanged glances that said more than their mouths ever could. Evan had inherited the old hunting cabin on the edge of the field now. Forest stand. Despite the locals' warnings, he stayed. They had only said one thing with clarity: that land, don't forget. The cabin was crooked with age. Its floor groaned like it resented every step. The walls, patched with stained wallpaper, gave off a sour scent copper and mildewas. If the place itself was bleeding from old wounds that night, the cabin changed. The creaking intensified, rhythmic and intentional. The floorboards grew cold, even near the fire. Whispers seeped through the vents, muffled but insistent. Sometimes he heard his name. Sometimes other names he didn't know. Ain't there was an attic he hadn't noticed before, sealed with rusted nails and caution tape. Inside, a moldy trunk waited, thinned, old black and white photographs of townsfolk dressed in ceremonial robes, their eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. A leather-bound book accompanied them. Its pages described rituals, burning animal hearts, burying nails dipped in blood, covering mirrors in black cloth during the harvest moon. The journal ended with a final warning: if it wakes, no salt can stop it, no prayer can bind it, only silence keeps it hungry. Evan's dreams turned violent. He'd wake, choking on the taste of dirt and iron. His hands blistered as if from fire, but in the daylight, the fear dulled. The trees vanished. The whispers stopped. He began to believe it was all in his mind, till he saw muddy footprints leading from the attic to the edge of his bed. They were fresh and barefoot, and not his. Asterisk, at first, Evan tried to explain it away: rats, maybe, old pipes, groaning, the wind. But the third night, the whispers grew clearer, sharper, like wet breath against his ear. Words formed: stay, they rasped, bleed. The room smelled of rust and something deeper, rotted. His tongue stung with the sharp iron temps of blood, though He hadn't bitten it. He ran his hand along the wall, hoping for a switch, a crack, anything only to feel the wallpaper pulse, soft and wet, like diseased flesh. He jerked away, gagging. That night, he dreamed of the woman again, pale, her eyes sewn shut now, but her mouth wide open, stretching farther than it should. She stood among the trees. Behind her, a circle of villagers, chanting in agony, not devotion. He saw her burn once long ago, and yet she returned, piece by piece, in dreams and shadows. Her name echoed across his thoughts when he woke. Isabella. He lit every candle he could find, praying like the journal instructed. For a moment, the room warmed. The whispers faded. Relief crawled in like sunlight through a cracked window. Then he noticed the condensation on the mirror words written from the inside. You brought me back. The next morning, all his books were soaked, his pages stuck together with black fluid that reeked of rot and bile. The journal was gone. The attic door, previously shut, now hung ajar. The floor beneath it stained red, a slow drip coming from above. Evan started talking to himself. Long, drawn-out conversations he couldn't remember afterward. He hadn't eaten in days. Or maybe he had. The taste in his mouth was always the same, earthy, bitter, coppery. Then the trees returned. Noon, broad daylight, but the forest was back. And this time, it was closer. Asterisk, driven by fear and delirium, Evan scoured the dusty corners of his grandfather's study, where the smell of mold and old tobacco clung to every wooden drawer. His fingers trembled over cold iron handles, opening cabinets long sealed. He found brittle newspaper clippings wrapped in yellowing cloth. One headline read, 5 vanish near night forest, only lantern found. Another, local clergy condemned the woods. It breathes evil. At the bottom of the box, carried under moldy hymnals, was a leather-bound diary, his great-grandmother's. The cover burned cold in his hands. Inside, ink ran in erratic loops. She spoke of a sickness in the trees, a shadow that took people and gave them back wrong. A child returned, one smiling with someone else's voice. Villagers carved symbols into their doors, wore salt-filled pouches around their necks. But it never stopped the forest from growing one tree closer every night. That night, Evan lit a circle of salt and candles, following the rituals described in the margins. The wind outside stopped. The whispers did too. For the first time in days, the air felt still, the house silent. He dared to believe it was over. He even laughed until the salt blackened. A scream erupted from the basement, his own voice, screaming from below. The floor buckled under his feet. The air turned thick, every breath tasting of bile and copper. Shadows slithered along the walls like oil-slick vines. The wallpaper peeled on its own, revealing symbols etched deep into the wood symbols that pulsed. He dropped the diary. It thudded on the floor and opened to a final page, smeared in blood. One word stood alone. Return. Then the lights flickered and stayed off, and somewhere beyond the walls, the forest knocked 3 times, soft, measured, inviting. Asterisk. Evan descended the stairs, every creak underfoot echoing like a death knell. The basement reeked of wet stone, decayed roots, and something sharp like copper soaked in rot. The air clung to his skin, moist and cold, like something breathing just behind him. The flashlight flickered, casting quick-moving shadows across the cracked cement walls. Then it landed on a figure in the far corner. Not a person in the mirror, one he'd never seen before. Its frame was warped wood, etched with ancient symbols that pulsed faintly, like veins under skin. As Evan stepped closer, he tasted iron on his tongue, blood, bile. He couldn't tell anymore. The reflection in the mirror wasn't right. It showed him, but with hollow eyes and a grin that stretched too wide. Then the mirror blinked, panicking, Evan stumbled back into a rotting shelf. A box fell open, revealing scattered bones and a folded cloth soaked in something dark. Inside was a faded photo, a boy with black eyes standing before the forest, dated 1892. Scribbled on the back, we gave it one of our own. It wasn't enough. He remembered the diary's final word. Return wasn't just a warning, it was a command. The whispers returned now louder, in voices he recognized. His mother, his childhood friend, his own. They circled him, echoing from the pipes, rising from the floorboards. The basement grew warmer, then scalding. The concrete began to sweat, then bleed. The walls pulsed with wet, fleshy sounds. He screamed, begging for it to stop. Suddenly, dashed silence. The mirror was empty, its reflection gone. He stood alone in darkness. Evan took a trembling breath, thinking maybe he imagined it all. Then something cold brushed his shoulder. He turned nothing. Except now the mirror showed two figures, and both were smiling. Evan crawled out of the basement, heart hammering like he wanted out of his chest. The air upstairs wasn't better. It was heavier, denser, as if the house itself was inhaling with him. He collapsed in the hallway, gasping. The wooden floor beneath him felt wrong slick, like wet flesh. A coppery scent curled into his nostrils, thick and metallic. When he looked at his hands, they were stained red, but he hadn't bled. Clutching the faded photograph from the box, Evan traced the boy's lifeless eyes. In the moment, his fingers brushed the image. Searing vision split through his skull. Men in 19th century clothes, tying a child to a tree beneath a black moon, chanting in a language he didn't recognize, but understood all the same. They had summoned it. The forest had never been natural. It had been built, fed, awakened. Sweat soaked Evan's shirt as he staggered toward the front door. He opened it. For a brief second, the world looked normal. Daylight poured in. Birds chirped. Hope. He stepped outside. The forest was there. Pitch black trees where his driveway should have been, twisting upward, blocking the sun. And in the center, the same tree from the vision, still slick with old blood. Behind him, the house groaned, floorboards creaking like breathing lungs. He turned back. Shadows crawled along the ceiling like insects. The wallpaper peeled itself, off in strips, revealing words scratched beneath. You looked too long. He screamed and ran back inside, slamming the door, but the forest was inside now, into every wall, branching along the ceiling like veins. On the hallway mirror, something new had appeared. Another photo, freshly developed, pinned with a nail. Evan, eyes blackened, standing beside the boy. But the boy was smiling wider than before. Asterisk, Evan stumbled backward, the photo still burning into his vision. The boy's smile wasn't just wide, it was unnatural, carved like a wound across his face. Evan's knees buckled, landed on the cold tile of the kitchen, which suddenly felt too slick, like it had been coated in old oil or blood. A sharp copper stench filled his nostrils. He gagged, bile rising from his throat, his mouth tingling with the phantom taste of rust and rot. The kitchen lights flickered, and in their pulsing glow, he saw something forming on the walls, branching, vein-like patterns of black mold spreading rapidly, twitching as if alive. From the pantry came a low creaking, like something shifting its weight inside. Evan reached for the drawer, pulled out a rusted knife, not to fight, but to feel grounded, real. The metal felt icy, vibrating faintly, as if resisting his grip, desperate for answers. He returned to the living room and found a journal, again the one buried with the photograph. This time, he turned to a torn page tucked between others. A priest's writing, dated 1891. The forest is not land, it is hunger. We tried binding it with blood rites, salt, and sacred ash, but the child was not enough. The trees, remember? And they want more. The air seemed to pulse around him, Whispers slithered beneath the floorboards. Not words, but intentions. The forest wanted him to know. He was already inside it. He screamed into the silent sand for a moment. Everything stopped. The walls settled. The whispers faded. The house exhaled relief. Maybe it was over. Then the lights snapped off, and from the hallway, dragging footsteps began. Not one set many. The mold on the wall writhed again. This time, it whispered a name. Dot. His asterisk, Evan, bolted upright, back pressed against the crumbling wall, breath ragged. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy, listening. The copper stink had deepened, clinging to his throat like smoke, like old coins soaked in blood. He wiped his mouth, only to realize it was smeared with something thick and black. His own saliva, or something else entirely. The hallway stretched before him, but the geometry was wrong. The walls leaned inward, ceiling slumped unnaturally, dripping with a slow, dark ooze. It wasn't water. It smelled like meat gone bad. The wallpaper bubbled and peeled, revealing childlike scrawls beneath drawings of a forest with faces hidden in the bark, twisted mouths in the trees. Evan staggered forward, barefoot over the warped floorboards that pulsed like flesh. A room yawned open beside him. Inside, rows of dolls nailed to the wall, each missing their eyes. A wooden mask rested on a shrine, carved with jagged runes and smeared with dried blood. As he reached out, visions hit him like a sledgehammer. A ritual in firelight, hooded figures chanting in a forgotten tongue. A child bound in thorn vines, screaming, then silence as the forest swallowed them whole. The villagers had once tried to appease the forest's hunger, offering their own, but the forest learned. It grew smarter. Now it chooses, snapped back. To the present, Evan dropped the mask. It cracked open, and a foul wind burst forth. For a moment, nothing moved. The walls stopped bleeding. As the air lightened, false hope. Suddenly, the dolls began to whisper in unison his name, over and over, louder, shriller, until the floor split beneath him and cold roots shot up, clawing around his ankles. A child's voice echoed from below. Ready or not, ... here I come. Asterisk Evan's screams were muffled by the damp earth as the roots dragged him downward, cold tendrils coiling around his chest like skeletal fingers. Dirt filled his mouth, gritty and coppery, tasting of rusted iron and old blood. The air grew colder wet, thick with the stench of rotting leaves and something deeper, fouler. Somewhere above, the doll's whispers faded into faint giggles. Like children playing hide-and-seek in a graveyard, he landed with a sickening thud in a subterranean chamber, his pulse breathing, almost. The walls shimmered like skin stretched, too tight, faces pushed through the muck, distorted in agony, eyes rolled back in silent screams. His fingers brushed one, and the texture was slick, rubbery, and disturbingly warmed out around him. Relics lay scattered, cracked skulls carved with runes. A rusted locket filled with hair, an old cassette recorder, clicked it on, and a voice quivering, desperate spoke. The forest isn't a place, it's a hunger, brewed from pain, fed by sacrifice. We gave it our lost, our broken, but it never got full. Evan's vision blurred, his thoughts no longer his own. Shadows slithered at the edges of his eyes, whispering promises and curses in the same breath. His mind fractured, pooled thin. He wanted to leave, to scream, but his body felt like clay, unmoving, molded by the forest's will. Then dashed silence. The walls stopped pulsing. The faces faded. A light appeared, warm, golden, almost divine. A way out. He stumbled toward it, hope clenching in his chest for the first time. But as he stepped forward, the ground rippled organic, like muscle contracting. From the light, emerged a figure, small, childlike, with hollow eyes and bark for skin. It smiled and whispered, "You're a part of the forest now." And Evan, he smiled back. Asterisk, weeks later. The town woke to a familiar dread. The forest had shifted. Again, trees now stood where street had been. Trunks twisted and weeping thick sap that smelled like copper and bile. The air itself seemed infected, humming low with whispers too quiet to understand, but too persistent to ignore. A dog barked once near the new tree line, then never again. Locals gathered in hushed clusters, eyes wide, recalling old stories whispered by their grandparents. Centuries ago, the land had been cursed by a grieving mother who buried her murdered child beneath the soil and called upon something ancient for vengeance. The elders had tried rituals, circles of salt, goat blood offerings, songs sung backwards at midnight, but the forest always returned, hungrier, closer, in the church's basement. Father Olin found a brittle journal tucked behind the altar. It belonged to Evan. Pages were stained with reddish fingerprints and drawings of eyeless children, roots growing from their spines. The last entry read, "It knows your name if you speak at night. Don't look into its eyes." I did. Now I dream. And bark. That night, silence felt like a blanket, too heavy to complete. The crickets had gone. The wind held its breath. Then came the sounds. The creaking of wood, not bent by breeze, but by something moving through it. Screams, muffled by earth. The mayor's house split down the middle, its walls leaking black ichor as if the building itself were bleeding. People prayed, boarded doors, burned sage, but deep down, they knew. Just before dawn, a child's laughter echoed from inside the forest. A new voice, not Evan's. Something else had come through. The question wasn't how to stop it now. It was who the forest would choose next.